Are you ready to take a divergent path? Does your mind long to escape the chains of the algorithm?
From deep within us all, both our instinct and intuition tells us there's more to every story, and truths are burning to be set free.
Join us as we demolish groupthink and encourage you to venture further into the what-ifs.
In a world where closed-mindedness and subjective thinking hijacks our reality, where any deviation is discouraged, time is running out.
We are about to venture beyond the narrative. Welcome to the Thought Rebellion. Franklin D Roosavelt famously said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself," the context of which was in reference to the Great Depression facing the American people at the time, and that the hardship ahead was tenable if each individual would do their part to weather the storm. One may then ask the question, what fear actually is. Has its function changed over the course of human evolution? Why are we born with some innate fears that are biological traits, and others we acquire through exposure or learning? Both, it seems, serving as a function in our growth and development and changing culture. It's an interesting topic, and I hope my fellow co-hosts are not scared to dive into it. Hi, Cece and Molnar.
Good one. Hello.
Petrified. How's it going?
Lovely. All right, well, get your comfort pillow or whatever you need, and your blankie, and let's go into it. What's the first idea about fear, guys? Anything before I take off?
I think that fear has its function, but I think it's gotten a little bit out of control.
I would agree with that.
Or actually maybe in control of some people.
Or a tool of control, one might say, yes. Well, just to start it off somewhere, we have to start somewhere. So I've got here that we've all seen, and we know the imagery of a flock of sheep that scatter in a chain reaction of dominoes in response to the fleeing of just one or two of their number. And also you see it with a group of pigeons. If one is startled and hits and takes to the air, then they all fly off. And that seems like an animalistic reaction to fear. But fear in the modern human no longer operates in just the simple mob mentality, although we do see it. The simple mob mentality herd-like response to stimulation. In fact, fears are almost as individual to a person as every other aspect of their personality. Would you guys not agree?
I agree. I think that, like you said, it's animal instinct. And even though we like to think of ourselves as above animals, we are just an evolved animal, and we still hold a lot of those animalistic tendencies and traits. And one of them, I think, that's most deeply rooted within our psyche and then also within our body is the fear response.
Yeah. I think that we have complicated layers above that fear response structure, which explains it, but it's at its base the same as what's going on when the sheep run and the pigeons fly. What we do know is that once the fear circuit is alerted for whatever reason, and before our brains have time to judge how valid or unrealistic a danger we are perceiving, it immediately gets our body's systems ready. And it's this response that then turns the emotion of fear into the actual physical feelings we experience when we're scared. So what we're talking about is the protection survival circuits. And I guess we have to talk about the origins of fear. And like the first thing I think about is, what's the difference between the way animals feel fear and the way we do? And what animals conceptualize fear the same way we do, like that can be actually scared and afraid. And one thing I've got written down here is that chimps and humans instinctively fear snakes. And the idea is put forth that that's due to the idea that for thousands or perhaps hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, they were a main adversary to any sapien-like creature, Homo sapien or chimpanzee or whatever, a major predatory threat. And so this is like a biological innate fear that's coded by DNA into all the subsequent generations of the species that are born. They don't have to ever see a snake or something similar to that that's predatory. There's something within them that automatically alerts that fear response and that survival circuit.
I think that also, not on the chimp side, but on the humanistic side, goes into what we have been taught from an early age. And I think that snakes are always the crux of a lot of tales of things that lead to fear. And even like in the Bible, how the snake was the first animal to kind of play on humans. And I think that that's deeply embedded in our psyches too.
Actually, it's funny you bring that up. I haven't got it written here, but I can elaborate on that because in that transaction, whether it's just people believe it, the story, it's not Bible bashing here, but just in the story, the idea is that the snake facilitates in the human the awareness of to be able to be afraid. Because before that, if they were ignorantly blissful, they were more driven by perhaps instinct, which I think is an aspect of the fear circuit, but they didn't have that capacity before the interaction with the snake. So actually, maybe the snake does give birth to fear in that story in some sort of way.
Yeah, that's an interesting take.
I've just got written here dogs, right? And we all have had dogs, and I was thinking about, because they have evolved alongside us and we have conditioned them, that could they not learn traits that we have adopted? Maybe it's taken us many, many more years to evolve them, but because they've been around for long enough that they've learned how to be afraid the way we are. Because I've seen fear in a dog's eyes before. Yeah, they may not conceptualize it in the way we could articulate it and stuff, write a book about it and whatever, but they feel it, I think.
Yeah, like every time someone knocks on my door, my dogs go crazy, and that's how I feel whenever someone knocks on my door.
Stop calling Amazon CC then. I mean, stop saying it. But also my dog, he fears the thunder and lightning. Doesn't know what it is. And also my motorbike, which is similar. If you turn it on outside and it starts to rumble, he will run and hide under a table, thinking that the sky is falling, I think.
I think anytime you spend a lot of time around animals and you watch their behavior, it's interesting to see how differently different animals respond, because I also have chickens and they don't really have that same fear response as other animals. And then I also have alpacas, and the alpacas are literally not afraid of anything. It's almost like they're like these innocent creatures that they'll, like the woman we got them from said, we have to be careful because, like you're saying, a snake, if there's a snake, they'll just go up to it because they're so curious, and they don't have that awareness or fear mechanism to kind of protect them. So it's just interesting.
That is. And you say chickens as well. It's like, what the hell does the chicken care about the weather? It does not at all. Like, it's like, I'm just pecking around here. And I guess it's the complexity of their brains and their cognition. And wouldn't think that a dog is that much different from a llama in its brain capacity. But that's why I lent it to the idea of the conditioning and the domestication, that I know that we have been dealing with alpacas, but not on the level of dogs, right?
Yeah. And they're also our companion animals, so they're with us 24/7, and they watch us to see how we respond to things. And it's almost just like whenever you're raising children, your kids aren't naturally afraid of things. That's a learned behavior as well. So whenever we raise our kids and we teach them to be afraid of like touching a hot stove, that's a learned response. It's not just innate within them. I think there's certain things that are innate, but I think most fear is a learned behavior as well.
So it's like copycatting as well, and the dog can copycat, and it does feel your emotion and stuff. Like they say, when you're walking the dog or your dog or whatnot, if the owner, that on or off the lead, whatever, feels any tension or anxiety, the dog will feel it too, and therefore it will act differently. But if the owner is calm, say passing by another dog, then the dog has learned that type of behavior as well. So the question is whether are they doing it independently, or are they just copying us and just reading the environment with instinct, which is what most animals do. So because we talk about instinct, I think that it's tied into fear because, and like as we go through, I think it's explained, but instinct, we know, allows animals to both hunt for their food and evade predators. So when predatory and prey animals cross paths, the prey begin to see their entire environment as a mosaic of safe and dangerous places. And ecologists have termed this the landscape of fear. And that was really interesting to me. And so I looked a little bit to an example of a landscape of fear. And the one that stood out was the moon, which was funnily enough too, because we know that a lot of animals are nocturnal, and it's to do with the dark, and that's scary and whatnot in our perception. But the amount of moonlight due to the moon phases affects the environment that the prey animals are living in. So in a full moon, the scary full moon, when the werewolves come out, the ground is much more lit at night, and therefore more dangerous for them to progress around, for whatever reason. And the prey animals that are maybe higher up or in advantage points can see more of what's going on. And so when full moons are out, the prey animals are more scared and they hide because they're hiding from the light. And I just thought that was interesting, that there's such a landscape of fear, and how might that relate to human beings if it's affecting them in that way? Like, obviously, a human being standing next to a volcano has a landscape of fear when the lava's coming. That's obvious. But what about the more subtle ones?
For sure. I think everything plays a part in how we respond, and we don't even recognize a lot of the time all the different mechanisms that are coming into play. Like whenever we're at home and surrounded by all of the things that make us feel safe, I think that that's one environment to be in. But then anytime you step outside of that comfort zone, that's whenever I think more than anything, it's just the unknown that people are afraid of. And that includes the dark, because if you're in the dark and you can't see, then that makes you fearful.
Yeah, and that's to my next point too, because there can be conceptualized danger and like actual imminent danger. So if like a danger's thought of in your mind, you conceptualize it just using thoughts as if it's a possibility, like in a future time, and it's not an like impending danger that's upon you, then the thoughts we have manifest like an aversion to an idea of fear, not actual fear.
Yeah. I think that's when we get anxiety.
Yeah, that's right, right? And that still taps into our protection survival circuits, and it still uses the primitive mechanisms that would attempt to avoid danger in us in, whatever circumstance, but it's actually an imagined one. And it's unnecessary almost, but it's something that we go through.
I have a good quote that goes along with that. There was just so many good quotes that go along with fear. I guess people have been thinking about it for a really long time. Seneca famously said that there are more things likely to frighten us than there are to crush us. We suffer more often in imagination than in reality. And I think that's so true and goes along with that, that you can make up a lot of these anxieties in our mind. And then once we actually face the thing that we're fearful of, it's not as bad as we've made it out to be. Almost 100% of the time, honestly.
That reminds me of the Carl Jung thing and the facing the shadow idea, right? Like some of these things are imaginative, and the only way to deal with them is facing them. And once you do, you'll often find that you made it out much worse in your mind than it actually would have been, like that it actually ended up being. I had a quote too, and I didn't know where to put it. So since you quoted one, I just want to say it quickly. And it was about it's to do with a monk, and there was an invading army that was going to come take over the town, and the monk sent everybody away. He's like the master of the monks or whatever. He was like the dude. And he just stayed by himself in the temple waiting for the army. And then the army came, and the general walked up to him and drew his sword and said, "What are you doing here, old man? Why didn't you flee with everyone else? We're taking this down. Don't you know I'm the type of man that's not scared of putting this sword straight through you without blinking an eye?" And the master monk looked at him, and he was going to he slam dunks at it. He says, "Don't you know I'm the type of man you can put a sword through and I won't blink an eye?" Just wasn't afraid. And I thought that was cool.
Badass.
Yeah, that's right. So an idea about all this, is there an antidote to it to dissolve the thoughts I wrote down here? And it's like the way to do that is to understand the process like we've sort of just explained, CC, to see what's going on when we're getting scared and afraid. And that is definitely not to say that you should fear nothing and be totally reckless. Not at all. The case, for instance, with cars and death or injury, they're all to be feared when you're playing in traffic, because fear doesn't make us bulletproof. What it does is it prevents us from getting into a situation where we're exposed to danger, most likely. So it's not that it actually protects you directly. It's thought that all fear really does is either paralyze us or prompt us to flee and avoid the danger. Thoughts of fear can often limit growth and understanding because of this. It might lead to overcoming a situation. And so it's more beneficial to understand that cars move faster than you, will likely collide with you if you get in their way and if you're not careful and alert, and that there are systems in place that you can follow to avoid harm. Hence, the very real fear of death in this situation is unnecessary once the thoughts you have are analyzed and the situation is properly understood.
Yeah. So you're saying that kind of having like a metacognition of being able to understand what you're fearful of, and then the processes of becoming fearful. So are you saying like the physiological responses, being able to recognize those?
Well, I think the physiological, I guess they come a little bit after or maybe simultaneously. But yeah, I'm just saying that because, like you said, a moment ago that some of it's unconscious, that we do these things by habit or instinct. But if we just expand the idea and understand why we're anxious and how a waste of energy that is, and think of it in this way, then we can dissolve some of that. But that's not really taught. Like, you can teach your own kids that, but society's not taught that, because often we're more manageable in a fearful state.
Right. I do think the younger generation is maybe getting a little more in tune with that type of thinking. And I don't know if it's just maybe coming from social media or what it is, but I think it is teaching the kids to take a step back and think about things that are causing them stress. I think especially stress, because I mean, that goes directly along with fear and with anxieties, is putting yourself in stressful situations all the time. And just the kids that I'm close with, and I know they're much better at being able to recognize those situations, and they'll remove themselves from it. I feel like my generation, like, we just threw ourselves into stressful environments and like have been going at it for like 20 years.
Yeah, and probably that's because we've seen the ones before us do it with even more fervor, and we're just
Yeah, for
following on.
sure.
It might be losing a little bit of steam, but it's definitely propelled by the generation before, and also the climate of fear, like news and television and TV and movies all use fear to sell their wares. So we're exposed to it all the time on all fronts.
You do bring up that media pushes fear, and I think that that really started being driven home in the generation prior to ours, and that was because they had access to television more so than anyone before them, so they could see the images that went along with what was being said, because like hearing something on the radio is not creating the picture as actually seeing it on the television. So I think that people, once they were able to see the images that went along with these horrific things that were happening, especially during the 60s and 70s with the wars, I think that really started perpetuating this fear cycle in people and also in the media. And it was just a continual cycle. And then once the media groups found how successful that was in getting viewership and also just people wanting to consume more of it, that I think that that's how that cycle began, was just the constant fear mongering.
Yeah, I think somewhere in there they worked out how the human being reacts to that, and it can really polarize people. When you started saying that and you mentioned radio, I thought of the War of the Worlds broadcast and how that freaked
Hmm.
everybody out and they thought it was real. So in all mediums, I feel like, you know, fear is useful. And in the present current day one, well, the war on terror, pandemic, whatever, that's all fear factor. And it can actually umbrella and bring people together and make everybody get on the same page, herd them into the pen.
I think we saw it more so during, especially with the lockdowns, because everyone was at home and had so much time on their hands. And it was the first time that I really heard about doom scrolling. And that's whenever people seek out bad news and are just constantly searching terms that they know are going to pull up some horrific news. And I feel like it's almost an addictive type of behavior as well, because, it releases cortisol and whatever other, like your adrenaline, gets your adrenaline going. And people feel it's almost like getting a hit of something whenever you read these headlines that are predicting the end of the world or whatever it is, death and doom and gloom.
I feel like something in people when they watch the news in general, even if we're not talking about a pandemic, which is a high intense situation, rather than just say you're watching somebody's robbed a bank or what, just the normal crap that happens in life. But sitting in your house in your safety position, with your security all around you, and then viewing the world outside through the window that's the TV, and seeing other people having hardship and going through trauma and trouble is like a satisfying feeling that it's not you and that you don't have to be fearful because it's happening to somebody else. I think there's some psychology in that, and that's why people can be addicted to watching the news, because they want to see how bad everything is in comparison to their own lives, and then give themselves some sort of limit or judgment. I don't know what's the word for that.
I don't know. I feel like maybe self-satisfaction, I guess, too.
The gauge for how bad their life is compared to everybody else's. And I think that that's part of that too. And then on to the other point, you say, well, it sells as well, and they can be addicted to it because some people have that real strong draw to extreme horror or violence or whatnot. And I think that what's going on there is that it's appeasing that circuit in them, like they've got some obsession or fascination about it, but they obviously don't want to directly experience it and have personal harm, but they're happy to do it in that same voyeuristic way that I was explaining about the news, where they can do it from unconsciously, even they might not know, but like that from a position of safety and still experience it.
It's interesting that you bring that up, that people seek that out, because I do think that what people are starting to realize, especially researchers and people working in the field, like that are trying to push things to make people feel better, if, everybody their go-to is doing meditation or like breathing techniques or certain exercises that kind of are supposed to regulate your system. But I feel like some people, they don't need that calming for their system. What they need is more stimulation. So it's like when people are seeking out these adrenaline rush, like you said, like if they are horror junkies, or if, like you, Discordian, you've jumped out of a plane. I'm sure that got your adrenaline going.
Yeah, it did.
And that feels good sometimes. And that you're in a somewhat controlled environment, that you're probably not going to lead to your death. So it could, but
Hopefully.
that's part of the rush, I guess.
All that is more to a point towards the end, but I'll touch on it here. And it's the unconscious trauma of the past, but not, I don't think the individual's past, but the past in the psyche of the human experience. So like when we were more animalistic and instinctive in our lives, adrenaline did rule that, and fear and instinct did rule our thing. And there's some echo of that in our DNA or whatnot. And so people that have certain aversions or draws to those stimulations could be tapping into, for whatever reason, something from much, much longer in the past.
But you know what? I don't think it even has to go back long time in the past. I think that people that grew up, I feel like whenever I was a kid, I was always stuck in like fight or flight mode, which is basically our physiological response whenever you do have a threat, even if it's a perceived threat that's not real. I feel like when we're kids and we're stuck in that mode, or like even if you do experience where you never have safety and you're constantly worrying about having a place to stay or having food or whatever it is, I feel like if you have traumas early in your life, that can come out too, because you're wanting that comfort, even though people don't think of it as comfort. It is, because that's what you know. So we're always seeking what we already know.
Yeah, what's familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel like that could be another reason why, as adults, we seek out these high stress situations, because that's what we've known our entire lives.
Yeah, it's like what you said before about it's in association with unknowns. I've got here lack of knowledge and unfamiliar scenarios will set off alarm bells based on that self-preservation. So I've got some philosophy of fear to do with, have you heard of Krishnamurti before? You must have, CC.
It sounds familiar, but let me know.
Yeah, an Indian philosopher that was talking as an old man in black and white days. So I think he's passed away now, but he's talked about everything and anything. So I really wanted to get a lend of his ideas for this topic. And so what I've got here, he's got some interesting ideas about nature of fear and its modern day effects on the mind, as opposed to its obvious necessity and benefit in the distant past.
I've got one example of fear psychosis if you want to hear before you go on.
Yeah, go please.
Okay, so from 1800 and 1600 BC, when an Egyptian city was faced with an invasion, which was later fought off, the fear remained and then was used by the leaders in order to maintain stricter control of their people. When a fear is manufactured by someone in power, it is often followed by a cure for such a fear, only available from those in power or those who want power. A quote that fits in nicely with that is John Adams famously stating, "Fear is the foundation of most governments."
Yeah, that's right. It sounds Hegelian as well. Like if you're the facilitator of the whole thing. That's essentially what's going. Like you said, it's the foundation of all governments. Not much has changed, huh? Like it's exactly what the structure is at the present day.
Well, just on that note, before you jump into the other Discordian, I think that really shows whenever these tyrant type of rulers like Mussolini were in power, they really grabbed a hold of the fear and paranoia as tools of manipulation. And Stalin, I think that that was their means to compliance with the people, and it led to people looking for someone to blame. And I think that that's what we're doing now more so than any time before that in my memory that I can remember, is that politicians and the governments have been pushing fear and essentially turning each, citizens against each other and having them blame each other for things instead of looking at what's really going on. So, very interesting.
They can highlight the fear of the differences between people, and like, for instance, the fear of homosexuals was there, and the fear of black people was once there, and all these other fears. And it's how that's used in society will either catch fire or be put out, and it makes you wonder why they're not, then, for the benefit of all, why some things aren't put out, where and instead they're thrown fuel on instead. So
You bring up pushing fear of
difference or whatever.
homosexuality. Well, even specifically speaking to that, in Italy, they just elected a woman named Giorgia Meloni, and that's one of the things that she was running on, was saying that she's going to dismantle the rights of those people. And it's interesting how things have kind of taken a turn, and it's people are going back to these same like things, issues that I thought that we had moved past. They're bringing them back up and running on the platform of essentially taking people back to the way things were, which isn't necessarily better. And you could look at the way that she ran her campaign, and it was very much a fear-based propaganda campaign. And some people are calling her the new Mussolini.
Wow.
So sorry, Italians.
Well, it's not the people, right? It's always the administration.
Yeah, but someone elected these people too, so.
Well, if governing institutions hell-bent on leading us down a path of fear, then the only recourse for us is to have some sort of personal thought rebellion in our own minds. And Krishnamurti gives us some ammo for that. He's got some interesting ideas about the nature of fear and its modern day effects on the mind, as opposed to its obvious benefit and necessity in the far off past. So he talks about animals, and he says that most of them live their entire lives in a state of constant fear and alertness. And this is because they are lacking the objective reasoning to analyze or understand what being afraid actually is, and to assess each danger as it comes beyond fight, fright, or flight. I put an extra on in there, CC. I think it's not meant to be, but flight is running away, fright is being paralyzed, and fight is like being aggressive and trying to attack the situation, which is a fear response also. So humans have the capacity to rationalize, which is different. Even so, many of us humans in present day environments have developed various types of unconscious psychosis that are created, fueled, and perpetuated by anxiety, which is a symptom of fear. And Krishnamurti says the distinction is to be found and resolved in understanding the difference of having an idea about fear and having an actual contact with an instance of fear. A lot of fears are imaginative, hypothetical possibilities that we attach importance to. They're not immediate threats to ourselves, our property, or our loved ones, even our self-esteem or whatever's on the list that you may be fearful of. It's often more of a projection of personal insecurity than that of imminent external threat.
I was just going to say that I think he is spot on with a lot of that. And I don't know if you looked into, he also had a lot of ideas about how life-altering experiences like that make you see beyond kind of what's going on just in our little sphere help us break out of that.
There's something about that a little bit, but if you've got it in your mind, you should just get it out there.
I was just thinking about, because what I remember of this spiritual leader was that he talked a lot about mystical experiences, and it wasn't necessarily drug induced, but through meditation or really just snapping your mind out of the rhythms that it's naturally in. And sometimes that leads us to getting stuck. And if you can help your brain to think in a different way, that it can alter your thought processes. And if you are really fearful, I think that's also why sometimes people seek out scary experiences is because it does almost snap you out of, like, if you have ruminating thoughts about something, if you're on a roller coaster or being dropped from a high altitude, you're not thinking about whatever worries you've been having. You're thinking about the immediate moment. Like, that's making you be consciously aware of the present. And, you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future and the worries of what could happen. You're thinking about just living in the moment. And I think that's something important that he taught.
Yeah, and when it's not an alarming situation that brings you to the present moment, when it's just when you're trapped in those circuits of unconscious circuits of existence, he talks about you have to sort of take the objective, it's yourself out of it objectively and recognize what's happening, which is what you said and what I'm trying to explain. And one comment he made, which I haven't written down, but it goes with what you were saying, is it's almost impossible for the analyzer and the analyzed to share the same space at the same time, because the biases are transferred within each. It's like the psychologist that's trying to psychoanalyze himself. You know what I mean? It doesn't always work that way, because there'll be things that are maybe omitted or not, not admitted and stuff. Yeah.
Like, you can't perceive the perceiver.
Yeah. You can't see your own eyes at the same time. Mirrors don't count, people. All right. If you think you're really smart, mirrors do not count.
Who's the voice inside your head? Is that really you?
Or is it the one that's listening to you, the voice inside your head? Is that the real you, or the one that thought of saying that I listened to it? Like, how far do you want to go?
Yeah.
So going back to it, there may be many types of fear, but most simply in two categories. There's physical fear and psychological fear. So physical fear is a physical form of threat or danger, and psychological fears are thought forms about future possibilities of physical forms of threat and danger. So one's like existential. With physical fear, we learn what we fear through a direct experience or an encounter. It could be personal, it could be shared, or even observed. For instance, if we take the idea of death, we fear it because we are convinced it is the end of life, though we have never experienced it. It's just that we can externally observe death. If death is sudden and instant, we have no time or opportunity to fear it. And it's the same with any immediate crisis. If it just happens, then it's dealt with in the moments thereafter. But when less urgent attachments to imagined danger or woe are formed and followed by the mind, they produce the same or similar emotional and physical responses as real and present danger would, but just in a simulated way.
Discordian, you bring up death, and I honestly feel like the thing that people fear more than anything else is death, because it's something that's going to happen to all of us. And even though people can tell you things that they've experienced from near-death experiences, or you can read about, all these spiritual beliefs of what happens after you die, nobody really knows until you die. So I feel like it's also that fear of the unknown, because it's almost something that you cannot ever really know until it happens to you.
Yes, I agree. It's the greatest unknown, and I liken it to the deepest depths of space as an unknown, like an abyss, and the deepest dark recesses of the oceans too.
I was going to say too, I think that also is why religion is so important to so many people, because it takes away a bit of that fear of death. Because if you are ascribing to a certain belief that you're going to have this everlasting life after you die, then that kind of puts to rest that fear of not having
the mortality.
Yeah, not have you essentially do have immortality in that case.
Yeah, so then it's you don't have to be so afraid, because you're not running out of time and not going to no longer exist anymore. The Viking idea of Valhalla was what made them such ferocious fighters in some retellings, that there was no fear of their mortality and their death, because it was going to be an everlasting glory in an afterlife where they'd actually be revered for those actions. So then that made them act differently in the physical world. Had they not had that belief, then they may not have been so brave and formidable. And then there was it might be something else too. Have you guys seen the movie Apocalypto, the Mel Gibson movie, a while ago? And there was a scene in that always stayed with me, and it was this the one tribe that they're focused on is moving through the forests and jungles and stuff, and they've come to, I think it's like an area where you've got this like Babylonian type of city, and you've got all these different oppressive leaders, and then you've also got the threat of the colonists coming, and they pass by a group of people that have that are fleeing from persecution that have suffered severe trauma at the hands of something or someone. And I believe it was these Babylonian governing that has killed half their people, destroyed their village, taken all their stuff and taken the slaves and whatnot, or something like that. But some people have gotten away, and they pass by each tribe passes by each other in the forest, and one of the elders, which is like the father of the main kid in the movie, he perceives before anyone else what's going on, what probably has happened to them, and he directs his tribe in another direction, and his son begins to look and try and observe, and he steps in the way and says, don't look at them and don't look in their eyes. And the kid was like, why? What do you mean? He goes, because then you'll learn their fear. Like something in you will take on that fear, and that'll make you weaker. And it's better if you don't know about it. And I was like, what the hell does that, like, how does that work? And it makes sense. But do we learn fear by not just experiencing it, by just interacting with other people and their tendencies and the things that they're exhibiting, like that we do with our pets and stuff like that, like we explained in the beginning? So I thought that was interesting.
Just going back to the idea of Valhalla and other similar wild ideas, do you reckon there's more fear in the belief that there is an afterlife, or that there isn't anything? This is your one and done.
Right. So to accept your mortality and just do your best and then not have any grandeur so that you're not deluding yourself? I don't know. That's a hard question.
I think it could go both ways, because it would boil down to if your fear is of your mortality. So if you're not afraid of that, then yeah, you wouldn't care either way what happens to you after you die. But then, like, if you're of the Christian faith and you feel like you've been a bad person and you feel like you're going to burn in hell for eternity, that might also create some fear in you.
100%. You're right. The afterlife could be worse than your life if you're paying for what you've done.
For sure. So yeah.
No, it's an interesting question, and if I wanted to elaborate more on it, I guess you either have to be honest with yourself, so you're not just an atheist that's trying to convince themselves that they're okay with 80 years and that's it, and I'm just going to live the best life I can. Some people that are living on the edge and they're like, nothing's promised tomorrow, so today is everything. I get that idea too, but it's a little bit hedonistic and it lacks meaning for me. So I'm not sure. I'm more tending to, and then thinking of another thought is, if you did know that there was something else for sure, then would that make you more careless and less responsible in your life? Because you're like, well, this isn't it. I'm going to be reincarnated, so who cares?
I don't subscribe to reincarnation. I just mean heaven or hell.
Oh, okay. Forget reincarnation then. So I get a second chance here, or I get another existence beyond this one. So does that make the one I'm having now inconsequential in some way? I don't know. It's a thought. What would you say? What do you think, Molyneux? What do you think? What's your answer to that? Which side would you lean towards?
As in, which one is more fearful?
Yeah.
The idea that this is it, endgame, worm food.
Because the idea, if that happens, is there's no objective awareness of it, because then you're not suffering if you don't have the objective awareness of being put in the ground. So your last moment is your eyes close, and then if there's no existence, then it doesn't really matter, because you won't know the difference either way.
Yes, but as a sentient individual with my current faculties, I would look at just being worm food as a lot less favorable.
So you would be more afraid of just dying and there being nothing else, rather than there being some sort of an afterlife.
Correct.
And being accountable for all the porn he's watched in his life. Okay? Jokes. Not really. But it is like, it's sort of like that.
I also am not a believer in, because I know that there's, like, in the Catholic faith, original sin. And it's like, why would you be, I don't think that we were created and that we're bad people just for being born. And I don't think that we take on the sins of our forebears or whatever the idea
Ancestors
is.
or whatever. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I honestly, and people that think that this is all there is, I would be incredibly nihilistic and sad too, because what a way to live if you think that this is it. My mind can't even fathom that rationality. So
I would prefer if there was an afterlife.
Yeah, me too.
But do you want to go to heaven and sit in the puffy clouds and eat ambrosia?
Some people are waiting for their 7 virgins and stuff like that. Like, and it's this other grand thing.
Heaven and hell is the Christian take. There's probably something that hasn't even been thought of yet. Although I don't believe in reincarnation, there's too much of a surplus to make that make sense.
Well, no, because you could be reincarnated onto a different universe, into a different planet, onto a different galaxy.
Yeah, there's a lot of mental gymnastics that one has to go through to make it make sense.
Yeah, I was just going to say if you're being reincarnated on Earth, yes, that doesn't make sense. But there's also a vast universe out there for consciousness to explore. So
I can make it make sense on Earth, because if you think of it as a hierarchy of karma and karmic cycles, then some people de-evolve and have to have lives of as animals if they don't progress past human, and some animals progress to be humans and vice versa. And it's, if there's that much sentient life, whether it's self-aware like the way that we think humans are, or if it's just ruled by instinct, it's still,
an amoeba.
yeah, even that, like if you're an asshole, you have to become a cockroach, or
That's why there's so many cockroaches, right?
there's enough of them for reincarnation, like, but also there's the idea that the crow in some spirituality is the tormented soul in limbo that's manifesting in the physical life as something, but it's actually its spiritual body has been degraded, and it's lamenting, and that's why they crow the way they do. Like, there's all these ideas, and it's all out there.
So the rationale is that you gain or lose XP in this lifetime, and that dictates your upgrade status.
Or you get degraded.
Oh my god.
I guess that plays into the simulation theory.
You die and you make a new character and you have to come back.
Yeah.
That's just explaining the 20 quadrillion ants on the Earth. So many humans turned into ants because they were crappy people and got downgraded to an essential part of the ecosystem, and if they do good ant stuff and dodge the cordyceps brain infection, then they'll gain XP and go back up the ladder.
Well, no, see, I wouldn't be putting the human constructs onto them, because I think that's incorrect. And I know it's just sarcasm. So in a certain way, it's like you've seen those clips of the cell to the fish that crawls out of the sea, that comes onto land, that grows legs. It's all these different animals in like a progression of evolution. Maybe there's an energy or soul-like evolution that's part of that. And at some certain point, like, I've always felt like all of my dogs progressed to be humans after they died, because they were good animals, they had a good life, they didn't bite people and whatever. Not that they had a choice, but like, they've got good energy, and then therefore they can be incarnated as human after that. And
Are you trying to refute doggy heaven?
Yeah, I thought all dogs go to heaven, but anyway.
Well, maybe they're not. Maybe they do. Maybe they skip. Maybe they're better than us and they skip human lives. Maybe humans become dogs.
I was about to say, how egotistical, Discordian. You don't know.
Well, I was following the thread of the evolution. We think we're superior, Well, I've always had another theory that if they became bipedal, we'd be in trouble, because they could take over. But yeah, so I've got some archetypes of fear I want to get through before we move too much away to that, if that's okay. And it's about how fears can limit our experiences and hold us back from achieving things. That self-preservation circuits that harbor existential fears can ruin a person's life, as they suffer the psychological effects of fear, emotions, and paralyzation, and are able to reach any of their full potential because of it. So there was a book that I stole this out of, but I sort of summarized over it, got their ideas, and sort of formed it into my own idea. Her name was Ruth Sukup, and the book is called Do It Scared, and it outlines archetypes of fear which can manifest in people. And they're titled, and there's a brief description. And you could have one, or you couldn't have all of these, because some of them contradict. You can have one or two of these things happening, and when you hear them, like the very first one, I related to straight away. It's like, yeah, I do that. But anyway, first one's called procrastinator, which is also a perfectionist. They tend to postpone things. They find it hard to start things because they're afraid of being inadequate or failing, and their fear manifests that they have a manifesting fear of commitment and a fear of starting new things. So that is like all those things. All these archetypes will tap into the fear circuit, but they're going to be templated with something that's relevant in the modern day, like in the way that they've grown up, the way that parents treated them, whatever, and they're that unique person that they are. So anyone a procrastinator here? I feel like I am.
I am, and I do it because the adrenaline of waiting until a certain point is a solid motivator and makes my output significantly better.
But actually, my daughter came to me the other day and she was like talking about this procrastination thing. And she's like, I've got this assessment due and I can't start it till like, I've only got like 3 hours left to sleep. And that's when I get motivated. And I'm like, yeah, I actually can relate to that. But I think I've overcome that a little bit in my later life. It may have been much more so in my younger years until I sort of found ways to rewire myself. You rewire your brain, so you're like, well, this is sort of in my way and it's not serving me, so I should do it this way. Like the Krishna Murati was saying, really be objective, see yourself as a subject that you're tinkering with and try and change things. But anyway,
You guys have to realize, though, people that don't procrastinate, it's not that we feel motivated to do it prior to the day before or whatever. It's because we force well, at least me speaking personally, I just force myself to do it because I know that if I wait, it's not going to be as good as it could have been if I develop it more.
I do better when I'm under that sort of adrenaline.
yeah. And CC, what you're talking about is a fear of something else, though, too. It's maybe of not having it done if you don't do it earlier. So it's another fear circuit activation in you, but it's the opposite of what the other person's doing, where they're waiting till the last minute. You don't want to wait till the last minute in case it's not done at all, I guess. And that's a fear.
I'm so inconsistent, though, because sometimes I'll start something months in advance and other times I'll wait until like an hour before to do it. So I guess it really just depends on. I think also, though, if you go through university and you just have massive amounts of stuff due all the time, it really reframes the way that you think about taking care of business. Because I was working, going to school, and raising a family. So it's like you don't even have time to mess around and wait to do things. You just have to do it when you have time. So
That's down to circumstance, sure. Although I've tried to do things early and they've just been not as good. For example, I once had a criminology assignment and I wrote 10,000 words in 2 days before submission and got 98. Imagine if I had drooled over that over time. I would have gotten way less. I've done assignments early before and they've just got like 80.
80 is still good in my book, but if you want top marks, I mean, I get it. That's the way you operate and it works for you. I feel like if you're inspired and you're enthusiastic about a topic, you can do better on it and perhaps earlier or whatnot, or even if you wait later. But if it's something that you just don't want to do at all, then you might procrastinate and put it off even longer. So I don't know. It's circumstantial, exactly like you say, though. I agree.
I loved criminology and psychology. Nevertheless, I still needed that adrenaline to do a solid, tight assignment.
that's not healthy.
What it does outline either way is that adrenaline is a compartment of the fear circuit, and it's working in different ways for different people. And the procrastinator is one of them. The next one I have here is the conformist or the follower, and they cling to distinct rules and follow the guidelines of their tribe or herd or family unit obsessively, and wanting to make obsessively trying to make the right decision based on a framework despite its potential effects on their personal success. Their tendency is to be afraid of change. They're anxious about situations that stray beyond the familiar comfort zones, and they find it hard to trust their own personal judgment because of that.
I know many of these.
Yeah, do you?
Uh-huh.
And like I said, that it's wide to people's personalities that, and why these are important to just listen to is because straight away you either say, I know somebody like that, or I know that I do that, and maybe when I'm doing it, I'm not actually conscious that that's what I'm doing. So this is why it's beneficial.
I would call that a type A personality person that you just described. High strung.
Okay. I'm not sure about all the types, but yeah.
I don't think anyone involved with us
Conformists.
tries to conform. Nah, probably not.
Just remember the South Park episode where they're all like, emos are such conformists. Don't know why I'm saying that in a Trump voice, but yeah.
South Park's gold. See, but the other idea that I fear in that is a conformists not conforming to unconformity. And then there you go, like it's the same thing. Anyway, moving on to another one, the ingratiator. They're overly agreeable, driven by a desire to please everyone for fear of being rejected by others or their group, and become ultimately ostracized. Public condemnation or humiliation is as terrifying as a hungry predator to these people. The fear of being judged and not fitting in. So they have fear of being judged and not fitting in. So their attention is always on their appearances or how others view them and their actions.
Yeah, that's like a people pleaser.
The outcast or individualist. It's almost the exact opposite of the ingratiator that I just mentioned. The person pursues their individuality over conforming, coming out of a fear of trusting others or being rejected or others being incapable. Therefore, they trust only themselves. To outside observers, the outcast may appear to be brave and fearless, So they're constantly reinforcing their distrust of others through their own confirmation bias, their fear being incapable, and then being forced to rely on others for help.
So I feel like these people, you could be a combination of these as well. Like, I don't think you would have to fit into one of these categories, which obviously a lot of people have traits of all of them.
Yeah, I did say you could have more than one, but I think there's some that conflict and then you can't be both as well.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
Some are good traits while they do sound bad. For example, trust nobody or be incredibly
Yeah.
diligent with trusting folks sounds bad, but it's actually really good.
Yeah, but I think also it's whenever it's taken to an extreme to where it becomes almost like a neuroses type of thing. Because, yeah, anything done in moderation is fine. It's whenever it's taken to the extreme and it impacts your life negatively.
I think context is important. So if you're in an enemy camp for 10 years, then not trusting anyone is probably a good thing. But if you do that with your family with no justification, then that can be detrimental. So it depends on the situation. It's circumstantial, like Moni said from the start. All of this depends on the person's whole life trajectory, their experiences, their trauma, their everything. The reason why they're like this is because they've had to become like this to compensate, or that's the way they've compensated with experiences.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think also identifying whenever people are more self aware, it's always beneficial in being able to identify what is controlling you. And so that you can try to maybe go beyond, just your standard and see if other ways are better.
Yeah, that's right. So if you're able to highlight these things, yeah, and you can identify them in yourself, that's the only way you can change anything. Otherwise, it's unconscious, just happening all the time as like a habitual response. Okay, so let's move on to the doubter. The doubter is dominated by the fear of inadequacy, that they not only doubt their own abilities, but the abilities of everyone else around them. The insecurity within themselves extends outwardly to the world, and they will be critical of others to mask their own emotions. Fear of revealing their true opinions and their deep self-expressions are always present, and they are jealous of people who can do it and often become sarcastic and cynical and prove to be the type of person that spread rumors and gossip. That one's a little obscure, but I think probably everyone can be. Yeah, I think everyone sort of has had times in their life when they've been a doubter, but I don't know if it becomes your personality, that would be pretty shitty.
That would be a pretty crappy personality.
The excuse maker. So they have fear of taking on responsibility, coupled with the fear of being held accountable for their actions. So they employ inaction as a protection. They're happy to let others take the lead and take all the risks. They will make excuses to avoid the spotlight, even diverting attention away from themselves and pushing it onto others. So that's just being scared to do anything, pretty much, I guess.
But you know what? I feel like all of these people, there is a place for all of this, because if everyone was the same, that would be pretty boring and awful. So I do think that it takes all kinds of people to make up the world, and that there's a place for time for all these people.
There's definitely a place for a lot of these types of people in an authoritarian governing society, because they're ripe for the controlling,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
they fit well in there. The ones that they don't are the ones that are going to be critical of everything. The pessimist is the last one, and the pessimist has a fear of any adversity or hardship. These people feel victimized due to the past, current trauma or difficulty, and perceive it in their future. Therefore, they come to the conclusion that all is futile. It is basically a manifestation of the fear of pain. They focus on the obstacles and the trouble, and not the opportunity for growth and perseverance. And so they decide to refrain from trying anything at all. I mean, I can see that being debilitating. And I have been pessimistic in times in my life, and it has passed. Like, for instance, on a journey where you're trying to read between lines or find out hidden truths that we talk about here in the Thought Rebellion, it can get overwhelming, and it can seem very futile. That what's the point of it all if everything is so geared and weighted against you? Like, it's futile. I can understand why people feel like that.
I was thinking about that today, actually, because I'm like, whenever you're doing research like this and you're looking into all of these A lot of the time it's negative stuff going on. I think also what I definitely hope to bring to each of these episodes and just more into my own line of thinking is there's also an opposite to that. So if there's this negative thing going on, there has to be something that can break that cycle or break the perpetuation of those beliefs in people. And I was contemplating that today and thinking like, how can you break out of fear and how can you stop the cycles? Because I feel like, especially now, more so than ever before, with after living through COVID-19 and just the constant fear based push from almost worldwide push of that agenda, it's like there has to be a way to gear your mind to not just focus on these negative aspects and to be able to move beyond fear. And I think that that's extremely important whenever you are trying to do good in the world, just to remember that, because it can get disheartening and it makes you feel like there's nothing you can do as an individual.
Where there's a yin, there must be a yang.
You know, the yang of fear is love. So
I like the yin yang idea more because it's not just black and white and 50-50, because there's also an element of each in the other, which is the circle aspect in the split. And that's what we need to understand, I think. So I've coined a term here, the reconciliation of our fears. Yes, like Krishnamurti was saying, to understand the fear process is very important, and maybe to understand different archetypes of fear is important in being able to reconcile with your own fears. But understanding that even though these things exist, they are a part of us. Even if you were to somehow change your thinking and avoid them, there's still a part of you that will instinctively be prone to feel these ways. It's not always going to be just a blanket change and then like, oh, now I'm good. There's always going to be something that's going to challenge you and force you to redefine how you think about everything and what you're scared of. That's just mortality in general.
I was just going to say that I think the ever perpetuated fear and anxiety and doom and gloom that pervades mainstream media and the world at large right now is a control mechanism that is put there to instill fear into people so that they seek out the comfort of someone else instead of empowering themselves and not being fearful, but instead living as fearlessly as possible and doing what really drives you and gives you fulfillment in life. And I wanted to throw in one more quote because it's my favorite quote from Dune, and it's one of my favorite of all time. And it's, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain.
Wow. I've never heard that. I like it.
Yeah, I think Paul Atreides says that in Dune.
Well, I think it was just the disposition there to fear, so not just being fearful, but recognizing it is what we've been saying. And then just my final thing is about cycles, like, and your idea, Cece, about there has to be an opposite force and all this. So I'm feeling like the cycle of fear is like you fear something, then you overcome that fear, then you're better for having done so. Even though there will be probably a new fear coming around the corner, because transiency is a fact of life and things change, and change can be fearful, that will still happen. But each time you overcome one of those ladder rungs, you're getting closer to something, we hope. So yeah, it's all happening in cycles perhaps, and don't be disheartened if you're afraid of stuff, because we all are. We've been afraid since we were born, and grown adults are afraid of stuff as well. So you just got to keep moving forward.
I like the direction you took this episode, Discordian, because I feel like a lot of the time people will, like, they're explaining fear and they're perpetuating fears at the same time, and it's like that's not beneficial for people to keep hearing like this fear propaganda. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think this was a good direction to take it, and it hopefully will help someone in being able to move past some of their
Identify
fears.
something in themselves, and just to hear that it's normal. It's not the end of the world. Yeah, I did want to achieve something like that. I didn't want to just perpetuate fear, but I just wanted to highlight the mechanisms that are going on from a few different angles as I've understood them in my life, and hopefully it gave people some benefit to listen to it. I agree with that, CC. And I actually really love that quote you just said too. I'm going to go look it up. Thank you for joining us today. We'll be back next week with a new topic, so be sure to join us here again, because the thought rebellion has just begun.